number of conferences lately, meeting people, making connections, and just generally trying to raise awareness for open source. So that's kind of it's kind of a little bit about who I am. Like I said, this is not a sales pitch. I'm not going to be asking you to pull out your wallets. You can download GitLab CE. It's our community edition. It's open core. It's free. But I will throw in a quick plug and say that open source projects and personal projects that are public repositories get a free ultimate license. So if you're a school, if you're or if you're an open source project, and you host on gitlab.com, or if you run a self-hosted instance of GitLab, you actually get the top tier application for free because GitLab does believe in education. GitLab does believe in open source. So with that, I'm taking my proverbial salesman hat off, and I just want to talk to you guys. I just want to connect to you guys on a technical level. GitLab's a great tool, and I kind of want to talk about why that is and how that can change if you're a systems engineer, if you're a developer. It's really a great tool that will that can help you with your development process. So for those of you that don't know, GitLab is not related to GitHub. They're actually competitors. GitLab is not an engine that runs on top of GitHub. Those are two things I've heard in the past month. No, we're not a GitHub clone. We're our own thing. The only thing GitHub and GitLab have in common is the Git protocol. So just wanted to clarify that real quick. So what is GitLab? GitLab is a single application for the entire software development lifecycle. So we do issue management, we do project management. So if your company's looking at a Devops philosophy for your development processes, if you're doing if you're agile or Scrum or Safe or one of these other development methodologies, anything but monolith, GitLab has project management for that. SCM, source control management, that's kind of what we're known for. But some of the features that GitLab has been working on the past few years that a lot of people don't know we have is we have a CI/CD pipeline. So we have runners, which are completely open source. So just go online, look up GitLab runners. You'll find an open source project that's based on Linux. And anything that you can do on the command line, you can put into these runners, and they'll do your build jobs. The GitLab runners are kind of the workers for the GitLab application. What we've been working on the past year or so is security scanning. So we can do container scanning, we can do license management scans, SAST and DAST scanning. So that's static application scanning. So it'll check your code for known vulnerabilities. And then once your application is up and running, it'll do some DAST scanning, which is dynamic application ST. Anybody else feeling the acronym overload lately? Between the acronym overload and the marketing hype, I can't keep it up. Anyway, DAST is dynamic application scanning, and that's basically once your application is up, it tries to see if there's anything that can bring it down. I apologize, the mic's a little hot. And so actually later on this year, we're going to be releasing a new phase for the DevOps lifecycle, and that's Defend. So that's going to be IaaS scanning, things like that's interactive application scanning. So it'll try and do SQL injections. It'll try and send unusual queries into your application to see if it can find any vulnerabilities. And why all of these features? Why all these phases of the development lifecycle? A lot of us are probably familiar with GitHub. A lot of us have probably heard about Jenkins. In fact, I hate doing this to people because I hate these questions myself. But show of hands, who in here is a developer? Let me know who I'm talking to. Okay, sysadmins. Wow, split. All right, network. All right, everybody make fun of the networking guy. That's rule number one in case you didn't know. Blame the network engineer. Let's see, just enthusiasts? Okay, cool. Well, okay, dev manager, awesome. Anyone I left out? No project managers, I hope. Okay, because I have a joke about that later. Okay, so now that I kind of have an idea of who's in the room, So GitLab is not just about developers. Application development is not just about developers. And that's kind of where the DevOps piece of this talk comes in. What we're trying to do with development is we're trying to increase speed. How many of you, especially on those of us in infrastructure, because I spent 10 years as a systems engineer, how many of us are having to do more with less every single year? Less staff, less hardware. I see one guy shaking his head, and yeah, it's everywhere. Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, development's being asked to do the same thing. So I am a little biased. I'm a systems engineer. I spent a lot of years wondering what the development team was doing on the other side of the wall. DevOps is about removing that wall. In fact, that's a great comment, because that kind of leads into my next point. It's right now, so many of us are systems engineers and developers and security guys and project management, and there's these silos in between all of us. How many of us have spent hours trying to get an issue fixed because we needed something from another team? And you send the ticket over, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. You can't just walk over to their desk because they don't work in the same office anymore. How many of us have had problems with trying to get that new feature released for a development release, and we can't because the system engineers are too busy playing Halo to actually build the servers, when in reality the systems engineers have about 100 of those requests? How many of us have dealt with those days where we're stuck in project management meetings because we can't, and we're not getting work done? We're not doing anything because we're too busy working the queue. We're too busy talking about the work we have to do. DevOps is about changing that. It is not a silver bullet. DevOps is not a tool. DevOps is a philosophy. It's a way of doing work. It's a way of thinking about work. It's about taking a developer and a systems engineer and a network engineer and a security engineer and a project manager and whoever else needs to be involved, putting them in the same room, opening up those lines of communication, knocking down those walls so that we can actually get work done. And GitLab is a great tool to help accomplish that. So if you're stuck trying to, if you're stuck not being able to get work done, if you constantly feel like you're having to do more with less, and velocity needs to increase, but your backlog is increasing, GitLab is a tool that can help fix that issue. It can't fix your company, but it can enable a culture shift, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to achieve more with less. Over the past 5 years, tools like SaltStack, tools like Ansible, tools like pipelines like Jenkins and GitLab. These tools have become more and more and more powerful. So I apologize to the developers, but I'll talk to you guys here in a minute. But to my systems engineers, think about it this way. How many times do you build the same exact server over and over and over again? How many times do you get a request to build, none of us use MySQL anymore, so it's how many of us are asked to use MariaDB with the same developers that have access to the box, with the same patches, with the same utilities, with the same security scanning software? How many of us build those same servers over and over again? It takes 4 days to do it. After waiting a week to get the requisite hardware, get the VM spun up from the VMware team, how many of us do the same work over and over and over again? I got tired of it. It's like, I want to play with some of the new shiny stuff, but I'm stuck building the same server. And then what do you know? 6 weeks after you build the dev box for your DBAs, then they're like, hey, yeah, we're done with dev. We're ready for stage. And then 6 weeks later, you have to go back and remember what you did 12 weeks ago to build out the production server. And so you have this drift. You've got server drift. You've got feature drift. I mean, it's just a complete waste of time. So there's a greater need for all of us to be engaged in continuous learning. So when you're looking at something like continuous learning, you have to have that kind of time. And most of us don't have time to work 8 hours, if we're lucky, drive 2 hours there and back, spend time with our family, God forbid sleep, and learn everything that's coming at us. All the new technologies, all the vulnerabilities, all the changes in IT, in the industry itself. So we have to cut stuff somewhere. How about we cut some of the redundant, error-prone issues that we see? Why not take the manpower out of IT? We built these computer systems in order to make our lives easier. And instead, how many of us get those 2 a.m. phone calls on a Saturday night when a database server, I hope there's no DBAs in the room. I'm not intentionally picking on, on the database folks. I mean, how many of us get that 2 a.m. phone call because some database server that only 2 people in the entire company care about, and they don't come into work on Monday morning, but yet, because we're carrying the quote-unquote pager, we're the ones who get called. We're the ones who have to get up at 2 a.m. No matter if we'd been up all night with a sick kid, no matter if we'd been out of town, it doesn't matter. We're carrying the pager. We're the ones who have to get up and fix that and fix that server, and then very quickly wake up the networking guy and tell him it's his network and blame him. So this is leading to burnout. It's leading to poor work-life balance. It's leading to people not loving their jobs. I mean, how many of us got into IT as a profession because we loved working on technology? We loved gadgets. We loved taking things apart, seeing how they work, putting them back together. For us, it's servers. Other people, it may be cooking, but for us, it's technology. It's open source. And that even furthers my point, because with open source, you really can take an application apart and put it back together, see how it works, make changes, throw it weird errors just to see how it responds. But we end up spending all of our day reading tickets, going to meetings, building the same servers over and over again, deploying the same code over and over again. So we need to change how we work. We need to change how we think about work. So using a DevOps type philosophy, shifting left, so to speak, we want to put as much of the work ahead of our issue as we can. And to do that, we've got to work together as developers, systems engineers, network engineers, all around the same table, and we need to automate everything we can. So infrastructure is code, networking is code. I mean, all these acronyms that we get thrown at every day. So that was a really, really long tangent for a slide that actually only had about 2 lines of notes. So let me get back into my talk. But this is something we need to address as an industry. We need to work on automating what we can so that we can spend more of our time innovating. Because if we innovate, we can get those features released on time. If we're innovating and automating, we can work on whether Ubuntu or Alpine would be a better container platform for our infrastructure. We can actually do those things if we automate away the things that are error prone. If systems updates are part of an automated job and we get an email report at the end of the night, we're not sitting up at 2 a.m. installing patches, rebooting servers, and then verifying applications, because we'd have the monitoring and the automation in place to where the only time you'd get paged is if that automation failed. And if that's the case, then you look at the automation, you see where it failed, you fix it, and then you fix it once, and it works across the board. I mean, how many of us started using a tool like Tmux or Screen because we had 20 servers with the same kernel parameter that needed 1 character changed, that 0 needed to be 1, and that's all we had to do. But yet we had to use a tool like Tmux because we had 20 servers or 200 servers where we had to go and change that 0 to a 1 just to get everything working. So for today's talk, that's where GitLab comes in. And fun fact, this is not a fox. This is actually called a tanuki. And a tanuki is a Japanese raccoon dog, roughly translated. That's a tanuki. So the tanuki is known as a smart animal that works in a group to achieve common goals. So GitLab kind of picked the tanuki as its mascot, one, I think because it's cute, but also because they're very social animals. They work together to achieve whatever their goal is. So how many of us love doing live demos at conferences? I mean, what could possibly go wrong here? Because I'm on hotel Wi-Fi using handheld mic, trying to connect out to the internet to do this. I don't see how this could possibly blow up in my face. I didn't make any sacrifices this morning, so we may be in for a treat. That's not gonna work. Okay, give me just a second here. Yeah, we're off to a great start. Okay, so everybody might want to scoot forward a little bit because that looks like about all I want to get. Or maybe what I'll do. There we go. Yeah, that's not any better. Okay. All right. So for what it's worth, this is gitlab.com. And gitlab.com is just a GitLab managed instance of GitLab. So it runs on Google Cloud Platform, so on GCP, and it is free to sign up. You can have I forget how many repositories if you're a personal user, and you won't get asked to pay. So let's see. Let's jump into the demo here. Again, I apologize for the. So all the slides with screenshots of the demo itself will be available online after the talk. I'll make sure that that URL gets attached to the video. I do apologize for the screen quality. Actually, we'll have to spring for like 8K or something. Okay, so let me paint the picture here. We kind of talked about DevOps. We kind of talked about GitLab. So let's put this in practical terms. So we all get invited to a meeting. The boss is ticked. We've got a website. The front page is terrible. You can't read it. It's not engaging. We need to change this, and we need to change it yesterday. How many of us have been dragged into those kind of meetings, and you just go, "I'm the systems engineer. Is the server up?" Yeah, that's all I got for you. So that's happened to me more times than I cared to admit. But so we have this meeting, and we come away with some action items. We need to make some changes to the application. We need to give the front page a facelift. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of start from scratch. We're going to start a new project. We're going to walk through this. So with GitLab, I know it's really hard to see, but you can start either a blank project. You can create from a number of templates that are built into the application. You can import a project. We support Bitbucket, Google Code, GitHub, or just a straight repository. That's what we're going to do today. Excuse me while I grab the URL. It was in my clipboard until I restarted my computer. Does anybody notice that the more people watching you while you type, the harder it gets? Okay, so on GitLab.com, there's a project called Auto DevOps Examples. And I'll talk a little bit here in a minute about what Auto DevOps is. But GitLab gives you a lot of ways to get started with basic hello world type applications. So either from the templates, you've got Rails, you've got Node, there's Hugo and Jekyll if you want to try your hand at static web development. But then there's also different examples across GitLab.com. If you just go to the application, do a search for examples, you'll come up with hundreds of results. So we're just going to do a repo import by URL. And we're just going to name it self. Give it a description. Set it to public so I get all the shiny toys. And we're going to create. That's going to run for a minute. Bless you. Or maybe my Wi-Fi went down. Yes, all the megabits. Thankfully, this is being run out on Google's cloud, so so hopefully that doesn't. As long as I have an internet connection, I should be good. Okay, so we imported another project, and it's just very, very basic. There's, man, you really cannot read that. There's a Docker file. There's your server.rb file for because it's just a basic Ruby application. And all that's going to come in play really quickly here. But first, we want to think about the meeting we just had. So we're going to go and we're going to create an issue board. And this is where that visualization of shifting work to the left comes in. So I don't know how many of you are using Agile or one of the newer development methods, but there's this concept of backlog. There's the concept of planned, so things that have issues out of your backlog that have been looked at. They've been weighted, they've been triaged, they've been kind of vetted out a little bit, because giving a developer root access to your entire production environment probably isn't what you want to do as a systems engineer. In fact, most developers I know don't want root access, because if they don't have access, they can't get blamed. So there's backlog, there's to do and doing, and then obviously closed. So there's this concept about making sure that when an issue hits your board, when it hits your pipeline, to get it through that pipeline as quickly as possible. And we accomplish that in DevOps by focusing on as few of tasks as possible. Because how many of us go from all these different applications and you suffer from what's called context switching? And when you context switch, you lose productivity for almost 23 minutes. When you change gears, when you change tasks, it takes almost 20 minutes before you hit that productivity again. So I mentioned a little tidbit earlier about GitLab being a single application. So why is that important? That's where context switching comes in. So far we've gone through two steps. We've created our project, and we're going to create an issue now, and it's all been from within the same application, one tab. In fact, you'll see throughout the course of this demo that I'm only going to stay on this one tab, except for a moment where I show you that the Kubernetes cluster is actually spinning up. So 2 tabs, but just one for the sake of the demo. So we're going to create an issue, and our CEO wanted us to update the homepage. So we're going to come up with a super clever issue name, and we're going to update the homepage. So in that homepage, we've got to have tasks. So we can put in some notes from the meeting. I'm not even going to try and type anything out because you'd all just laugh. But I do want to point out that you can actually add subtasks to issues. GitLab issues and comments support Markdown. So all of us that are writing the Markdown train, I think all of my notes anymore are in Markdown. So we want to add some HTML coding. We want to change the. It's really fun one-handed. Change the header. And in case anyone was worrying, GitLab supports emojis. I know that's a big concern when I'm talking to customers. They're all about the emojis. I say that facetiously, but that's interesting. I hope not. Again, the fun of doing a conference demo over Wi-Fi. But one thing that GitLab, so GitLab's open core, which means that most 90+% of the application is open source. And you can go out there, you can change it, you can, in fact, GitLab is only about 600 people as a company. Interesting enough, it was less than 400 beginning of the year, so we've been growing like crazy. But only a small percentage of that is actually product. So there's only so many people that we can throw at this application. There's only so many people that can actually do development. Most of our contributions, most of our good features, most of our big bug fixes, our big ideas come from a group of over 2,000 developers, people in the community, people that work for companies that use GitLab, people that just tinker with GitLab on their own, people that were just scouring the internet and came across the project and said, ooh, I can make a contribution here. In fact, there's a school teacher, I forget where he's from, but he gave a quick talk at a recent company conference about how he's an English teacher, but he likes Linux, and so he found that he could actually give back to projects by working on their documentation, cleaning up the language, fixing spelling errors. But there's a lot of ways you can contribute. So some of the best features in GitLab weren't even developed by people who get a paycheck from GitLab, but from our community. And so if you go to gitlab.com/gitlab-org, that is the community edition. So that is the actual repository where GitLab CE lives. And I say that because if you're using GitLab for personal or professional use, there's feature requests all over the place for features or enhancements, be it for our issue boards, for our project pipelines, for our source code manager, and we make heavy use of the thumbs up, thumbs down. So once an issue starts to get a couple of hundred likes or thumbs ups, I can't believe I just said likes. Once that starts to happen, then a feature really starts to get some attention, and if someone from the community hasn't picked it up, then GitLab's product team really starts to look at it and goes, this is something we need to address because this is something our community wants. So, horrendous tangent there, but okay. So we've created our issue, and we've found some poor sap who's actually going to make the change. So we've talked about it. We've met with appropriate teams. We know what we need to do. We're not using HTML tags, or we want to revise the header. So we've triaged it. So now me as the poor sap who got saddled with this issue, I'm going to pick that ticket up. I'm wanting to assign it to myself, and I'm going to move it to doing, which means that I'm actively working on that issue. So before I can actually dive into the code, I've got to have somewhere to deploy it to. And that's where GitLab really starts to shine. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to stand up a Kubernetes cluster live in front of you. Again, what could possibly go wrong? I want to sign into my account here. I'm going to give my cluster a name. And then, so I kind of brushed through it really quickly. I apologize. So with GitLab.com or GitLab self-hosted, you can actually connect near natively with GKE. So Google Kubernetes Engine. Try and say that 5 times fast. Or if you're running on AWS, if you're hosting your own Kubernetes cluster, you can actually connect to an existing cluster using the API URL, a service token, and just a couple of clicks later, and you'll have one-click integration with your Kubernetes cluster through GitLab. So I brushed through it really quickly, but GitLab asked me to sign in to my Google account. So I signed into Google, gave it my password. Earlier I went and did the 2FA. And then it brought me to the screen here. And so I gave my cluster a name. We're not going to do anything with environment scope. I set it up on the right cluster and zone. For the cluster we want to spin up, we'll just go with 3 standard size nodes, and we want GitLab to manage my cluster. So we're going to create it, and this is the only time where I want to leave this tab.
Is there any governance around that that says you can only spin up
you can spin up as many clusters as you want. The caveat being that Google will charge you. That's the problem. But that's just like any other application. Okay, so the cluster is spinning up. Let's see if it'll show up on my account now. Maybe not. All right, well, I'll talk a little bit more and then I'll show you. Okay, so while that cluster is spinning up in the background, I'll walk kind of through our integration screen. So once the cluster is live and once the integration has been established, you can give it a base domain. So if it's theitguy.com or whatever the case may be, you can add that in. You can even give it a star dot so that it can be, you could have dev.mydomain.com or stage.mydomain.com. And then what's really great about having GitLab manage your Kubernetes cluster is that there's one-click installs for a lot of the major tools. So I don't know if you've tried, but Kubernetes is kind of a bear to stand up. It takes a long time. It's very in-depth. Unless you're using, like, there's an Ansible script project out on GitHub that can do it for you really quick. But for the most part, it's kind of a bear to get going. Not with GitLab. If you're trying to just get going with Kubernetes, GitLab is a great option because Helm Tiller is kind of the package manager, for lack of a better term, for Kubernetes. So once our cluster is up and running, we can do a one-click install. You can install an ingress point, which I think is just an Nginx pod. And once that comes back, it'll give you a public IP address from GCP. You can install Let's Encrypt. I know that's really hard to read. You can install Let's Encrypt, which will handle your certificates. You can install Prometheus. You can install additional GitLab runners. Jupyter Hub, which is a great project. They're an open source project in a community that are trying to help the scientific community with publishing research, publishing papers in a way that's actually usable and Knative. So if you're doing serverless, if you're doing functions, GitLab is one of the leaders in that space. So that's kind of the integration screen. So I can't stress enough, unless we went through and spent the 20 minutes to actually do it step by step, I can't stress enough how powerful that is. An entire Kubernetes cluster with package manager, with monitoring, with the ability to run encrypted sites and serverless, all of that just one click. This is kind of how I got going with Kubernetes, really, is just by playing with it through GitLab. Okay, cool. So GCP actually is, you can see, you can kind of see that my cluster is spinning up. And that's tied into a billing account. And when you start using GCP for the first time, Google will give you like a $200 credit or a $300 credit. And it's $300 credit, thanks. Yeah, you really do. Mine's almost gone. But if you sign up for GCP through GitLab.com, you get an additional $200 that's good for a year. So you can go out and play with GitLab and Kubernetes on GCP for about a year for $500 for free. It's really great. So then it depends on how busy GCP's infrastructure is, but it usually takes about 5 minutes or so, and you have a live Kubernetes cluster. And then you can actually go into the compute engine, and you can actually see the nodes that it spun up. You can see some of the details about it. We won't go into that today, but okay. So that's not going to spin up. So I was kind of smart. I had a moment, and I've got another project here where I've been doing the same thing. But I spun up a Kubernetes cluster last night because I anticipated GCP would be busy while I was trying to give a talk. So this is the same Ruby application. If the page will load, I can show you that we've got the same issue open. So how's breakfast? So fun fact, if you're not on a public Wi-Fi, This is actually really quick and intuitive. I'm getting ready to just jump into my slides here. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, it heard me complain. Okay. I'm running short on time, and I want to make sure to open up to questions. And as you can tell, I was... okay. There we go. As you can tell, I came prepared. I expected something like this to happen. So we went to GitLab. We looked at templates. We decided to import our own. We imported our project. So there is one thing I didn't quite touch on. I mentioned Auto DevOps a minute ago. And Auto DevOps is really a work of the open source community. Go to about.gitlab.com and search for Auto DevOps. This is really an amazing innovation, and it's GitLab GitLab the company cannot take credit for it, because what Auto DevOps is it's a configuration file that lives in the root of your repository, and it's gitlab-ci.yaml. Who loves YAML? What Auto DevOps is it's the ability to actually go through and welcome. Auto DevOps is a collection of sane defaults. That's really, if you boil it down, that's what it is. GitLab-ci.yaml is a configuration file that has been iterated on hundreds of times over by GitLab employees, by the community, by people from all over the world, all kinds of different backgrounds, to how do we best build a Python application, or how do we best deploy a Ruby application. So if you look at Auto DevOps, it just goes through and helps you build a sane pipeline. This is how you build this container. This is, and it's intuitive enough to scan your project to know what language it's dealing with. Is it Ruby? Is it Python? Is it C++? Whatever the case may be, it's going to actually look at that and apply a series of scans. It's going to set up the build deployment. So for someone like me who's just getting started with GitLab just a little under a year ago, and learning about Kubernetes for the first time, and being not being a developer, this was a great way to kind of get started and actually get results. Because I could deploy a template, I could play with the code a little bit, and then I could use Auto DevOps to deploy, and I'll show you the pipeline here in just a second. So we went through and we stood up our Kubernetes cluster. We signed into our Google account. Okay, so once the Kubernetes cluster is up and running, we actually get the public IP address. We can see where our zone is. We can see how many nodes we have, and then we can jump back into GitLab. We can install all of our one-click installers. So there's a public IP address. For those of you that like to heckle me, that public IP has actually changed since I wrote this. So if you want to try and troll me there, good luck. So then I just went out to DigitalOcean, and that's where my domain is my domain's DNS is hosted. Just plug in my URL and the public IP. Okay, so we created our issue. Apologize for the redundancy here. I wasn't expecting my internet connection to be what it was. So I picked up the work. So within the issue itself, you saw we added a description, we added some subtasks, we added comments, we gave the issue a thumbs up just to get it some attention. One of the other things that you can do from within the issue itself is you can create a merge request. And so why is this powerful? It goes back to context switching. Everything about GitLab's UI design is about efficiency. It's about making things easier. So if you just take the industry standards right now, you're talking about issue management with Jira. You're talking about CI/CD with Jenkins. You're talking about code repositories with GitHub. You're talking about security scanning with SonarQube. You're talking about project management with what's the big one right now? Team Foundation Server. They just changed the name to something Azure. So, I mean, if you just look at the industry standards, what is that? Just off the top of my head, that's 6 different applications. And chances are you don't just have one security scanning tool. Chances are you might have multiple builders. So you might have Jenkins and Travis CI. How much context switching are you going to go through to go from Jira to Jenkins to GitHub to SonarQube? But with GitLab, it's a flow, and I really wish that that the demo would have worked, because you can really see how you go from the issue board to creating a merge request. And what the merge request does is it does two things. Is it gets a pipeline ready, so that auto DevOps functionality we just talked about. It creates a feature branch, and then it ties it all together. So if you go into a merge request, you can actually see the issue that caused it. You can see related merge requests, and you can see the pipelines that have run and the communication, the conversation that has taken place around that. So I've got a feature branch, and so we created our merge request, and this is the start of that screen. So over in the description line here, it says closes 1. Issue number 1. So if I click that link, it'll take me back to the issue that we just created. And then you can see a hyperlink into the feature branch and into the master branch. And then GitLab took that another step further. There's a web IDE that, in my opinion, puts Visual Studio Code to the test, because this web IDE works really, really well, and I don't have to leave the same tab that I've been working in. So I open up my web IDE, and I can see the files, and they're color-coded, so I can very quickly see, okay, there's my Docker file, there's my server RB file. I can go in, I can quickly make a change. So I'm going to open up my server RB file, and all this application does is just display some text on a web page. Right now it says hello world, and you can tell that when we wrote this application, we left ourselves a note to change that to HTML. So let's go ahead and do that. We're gonna get rid of our to do comment, and we're going to put just H1 brackets, and we're going to change the text. It just said hello world. We're going to do hello self, because we're at SouthEast LinuxFest and we're having fun with live demos failing right out of the gate. So I mentioned earlier that GitLab was based on the Git protocol. It's running Git under the hood. So that means two things. One means that I don't have to do this in GitLab's UI. If I wanted to, if I have a workflow that works for me, I can do a Git pull, or I can do a Git clone, just like I would anywhere else, make my changes, do a Git commit, do a Git push back to the command line. I don't know about you, but I love Vim, and I love my Vim plugins. So sometimes that's just easier. If I'm working on a server and I just need to make a quick change, I can do that from the command line. GitLab will actually take that Git push, and it will still put it through the auto DevOps pipeline. So even if I make a change in the web UI, or if I make a change in the local, it doesn't make a difference. It'll work both ways. The other thing is it supports commit messages just like Git itself. So we all love our very indiscriminate GitLab commits. So update server RB. But then it also supports commit descriptions, so I can add in something a little bit more defined, and then I can commit that back to my feature branch. So now, I know this is kind of hard to understand out of context, but along the bottom of the screen, when I commit those changes, a little banner shows up, and it tells me that a pipeline was just kicked off for a feature branch by a particular person. And so I can click on that pipeline link, and I can see where my pipeline, I can see that my pipeline's running. And this is auto DevOps. If you wanted to put a mental image of it, this is auto DevOps. I didn't write any of these phases. So I've got a build phase, and that's showing me the GitLab runner spinning up. I can see that it's using my Kubernetes namespace. And then down towards the bottom, how many of us get so tired of watching Docker containers build? But you can actually do that live from within the pipeline. Or you can just sit here and watch the little blue circles fill up, and then when it's done, turns green, moves on to the next phase. Again, I didn't write any of this. This is just, I enabled auto DevOps for my project, and it goes, oh, I'm using a Ruby application. I'm going to need a Ruby container. Build it. Clone the code into the container. Now we're going to run tests. So there's our SAS test. There's our container scanner. And then I can actually go in and I can watch those container scans run, and I can see if there's any issues. My job succeeded. So then when the pipeline's done, it'll turn green, and I'll be left with something really, really unique in the industry. I'll have a review app. So I don't necessarily need to maintain multiple infrastructures anymore. I don't have to maintain a separate dev environment. Instead, all that can be done on the same infrastructure using the same cluster using tags. So instead of having multiple versions of my application where the infrastructure might have drifted, instead, I can use a review app. And what that is just a container that has a complete copy of my application and all the libraries and everything that go with it, that I can go in and compare A to B. This is what's running in master. This is my production, to my review app. This is how it'll look after I make my changes. And that shows up under environments. So the top line is my review app. The second line is my production environment. And what's really cool is these little green boxes. Those are indicators of pods. So I can actually look and see how many pods are running and see the health of each of those pods. I can launch a terminal into those pods themselves and run diagnostics, pull logs, or I can launch into the actual review app. So on top is master. That's what it was before. And then I can see that it's in my feature branch. Much easier to read and much more appropriate for the event. So once that pipeline's done, I can come back and I can actually set up my application to where if I'm doing co-developing, if I've got another developer that I'm paired with, or pair development is what it's called. If I'm pair developing with another person, I can add them as an approver. So they have to come in, look at the code, look at the comments, look at the review app, and then give their consent. And then once that's done, I can actually say that I can resolve my work in progress. I can say that this is done. This is ready to go back into production. And because of auto DevOps, it'll actually I can delete my source branch and I can merge that back into production, which will kick off a second pipeline, which will run another build exactly like it did before. It'll scan my code one more time. The big ask on the second one is just to make sure that nothing has been merged into production while I'm working on this issue that would then create a conflict, because how many of us hate doing Git conflict resolution? So it's actually going through and doing the build, doing the tests, and then deploying to production. And then then something I didn't point out on the merge request screen is when you resolve that merge request, it'll actually close the issue that you're working on. It'll mark the merge request as resolved, and it'll close the issue. So I don't have to get that call on Friday morning from my project manager going, hey, you said you were going to get this done this week. Why haven't you worked on this? Oh, I did. I just didn't close the issue. GitLab does that for you. So let me jump back up into my slides, and we'll get this wrapped up. Again, I apologize for the technical issues. So kind of the takeaway, something that I want you to think about is, what do you want to spend your time working on? Do you want to spend your time working on redundant, error-prone tasks? Do you want to spend your time working on issues that could be automated? Or do you want to spend your time working on something, do you want to spend your time automating and trying out new applications? Do you want to continue learning? Because I like to tinker. I like to play with something, figure it out. Once I've kind of learned it, I'm good. I'm ready to move on to learn something else. But if I can do that process and then automate that and then put it into a tool like GitLab to where then other people can come and make code contributions or utilize that code, and then I can move on to something else, I feel like that's better for all of us. That improves work-life balance, that increases job satisfaction, that helps give back to the community, because all of this can be public, or you can set it to private and only allow certain people to access these repositories. It's really up to you. So we're open source. We like open culture, we like open source, and just as a quick disclaimer, I built this demo using my System76 laptop, running Arch Linux with LibreOffice, Firefox, and GitLab. So, you know, I'm not going to stand up here and give my talk with a MacBook. But I know the screen was hard to see and the online demo didn't work, but if you go out to https://gitlab.com /Eric the IT guy /talks, you can actually see this talk and some of the others I'm giving, so you can get the slides and kind of walk through what I did, because that's really it's really just a great opportunity to see what GitLab's about, see how a single application for your entire development process can help make things easier, reduce context switching, and provide a more seamless experience. So with that being said, I've got time for a couple of questions. Yes, sir. So auto DevOps is scheduled to run on commit. So when something changes, it'll run a pipeline. But with a GitLab runner, you can schedule them. So if you have a nightly job that runs and redeploys your development or environment or something, you can schedule pipelines that way. So the question was, can you schedule pipelines? And the answer is definitely yes. Yes, sir. Okay, so the question is, how does the Kubernetes cluster stand up? It's not using kubespray to my knowledge. GitLab is just calling out, with the demo that I showed today, GitLab is just calling out to GCP, and GCP is just standing up a few compute nodes and then spinning up a kubemaster. So however Google Cloud is deploying their Kubernetes clusters, their on-demand clusters, that's all we're doing. GitLab is just making a call to their, I'm assuming it's an API. Sure. Okay, so the question is there plans to add any other providers? So right now, GitLab is the only one we have integrations with, but for a very long time now, and if you see him, I think Jason Plum has a lot to do with this, but for a while now, GitLab Enterprise Edition has actually been available as a one-click deployed droplet on DigitalOcean. It's a great way. Go out, spend, probably, I would recommend probably one of the $10 droplets. Go out, spin up GitLab, and play with it for a while. And then also just recently, I think a week ago, GitLab is now available on Amazon Marketplace the same way. It's just kind of a one-click deploy. I don't know if there's any integrations right now with DigitalOcean and their Kubernetes and GitLab on DigitalOcean, but that's where that when we were standing up our Kubernetes cluster, there was the two options. I went with Google Cloud because I thought that stood a better chance of working. There's either Google Cloud or you can add an existing cluster. So if you go out to DigitalOcean, spin up a Kubernetes cluster there, or if you've got one on your home lab, you can actually just grab the API token, the URL. There's a couple of other things you can add. It's just copy paste, send, and it builds that integration just the same. Got time for maybe one more? Yes, sir.